Every night, as the hands of the enormous clock in the royal palace slowly moved toward midnight, the atmosphere inside the palace seemed to change. During the day, the palace was filled with activity. Servants moved quietly through the grand corridors, guards changed shifts at the gates, and members of the royal family followed their usual routines. But when the clock approached 12, everything became strangely quiet. It was during one of these silent nights that the palace guards first noticed her. She was standing beyond the main gates, several meters away from the palace entrance. A thick layer of darkness surrounded her, making it difficult to see her clearly. The only thing the guards could make out was a long black dress that reached almost to the ground and a dark veil covering most of her face. She did not move. She did not call for help. She simply stood there, facing the palace. At first, the guards assumed she was a visitor who had arrived too late to enter. One of them watched her carefully through the security window, expecting her to approach the gates or speak to someone. But she remained completely still. The palace clock struck midnight. The woman slowly raised her head. For a brief moment, the guard thought she was looking directly toward him. He felt an uncomfortable chill run through his body. He immediately called another guard and pointed toward the gates. When the second guard looked outside, the woman was still there. They watched her for several minutes. Nothing happened. Then one of the guards decided to step outside. He walked toward the gate cautiously, keeping his eyes fixed on the woman. His footsteps echoed across the stone courtyard. As he came closer, he noticed something unusual. She was not wearing shoes. Her feet were completely bare against the cold stone ground. The guard stopped several steps away from her. "Can I help you?" he asked. There was no response. He tried again, louder this time. "Madam, this is private royal property. You cannot remain here." The woman continued staring toward the palace. The guard slowly moved closer. "Who are you?" Still nothing. He reached for his flashlight and directed the beam toward her face. The light revealed almost nothing beneath the veil. Only a pale outline of her face could be seen. Then the palace clock began striking 12. The guard turned his head for only a second. When he looked back, the woman was gone. He froze. There was nowhere for her to hide. The palace entrance was surrounded by high stone walls, iron gates, and open ground. The nearest path was clearly visible from where he stood. He immediately searched the area. Nothing. No footsteps. No movement. No sound. It was as if the woman had never been there. The guard returned to his post and told the others what had happened. Some believed she had simply walked away while he was distracted. Others thought he had imagined the entire encounter, because of the darkness. The following night, however, she appeared again. Exactly at midnight. Same black dress. Same dark veil. Same position outside the palace gates. This time, the guards were prepared. 3 of them watched from different positions. One stood near the main entrance. Another monitored the surrounding courtyard, and the third remained inside the security room, watching the cameras. They wanted to know where she came from. They wanted to know where she went. Most importantly, they wanted to know why she kept returning. The clock approached midnight. The palace became silent again. Then the woman appeared. No one saw her arrive. One moment the area outside the gates was empty. The next moment, she was standing there. The guards exchanged nervous looks. The woman slowly turned her head toward the palace. She remained completely motionless as the seconds passed. The guard inside the security room checked every camera. The road was empty. The gardens were empty. The surrounding walls showed no sign of anyone approaching. Yet the woman was standing directly outside the royal gates. The guard zoomed in on the camera. Her face remained hidden. He switched to another camera. She was still there. He switched back. For a few seconds, the screen showed nothing but darkness. Then the woman appeared again. This time, she was standing much closer to the palace. The guard immediately called the others. They looked toward the courtyard. The woman was still outside the gates, but on the security monitor, she appeared only a few meters from the palace entrance. Nobody could explain what they were seeing. The guards continued watching until the clock reached midnight. The woman slowly lifted one hand. She pointed toward the palace. Then she lowered her hand and remained there in complete silence. The guards did not approach her this time. They simply watched. Because by now, they had begun to understand that whatever was happening at midnight was not something they could easily explain. The following night, the guards were determined not to let the mysterious woman disappear again. They had already spent hours discussing what could have happened during the previous encounters. Some believed she was a trespasser who knew the palace grounds extremely well. Others suspected that someone was deliberately creating fear among the guards. But there was one detail nobody could explain every time the woman appeared. It was exactly at midnight. There was never a few minutes difference. She appeared when the palace clock struck 12. And she disappeared shortly afterward. So this time, the head of the night security team ordered the gates to remain closed and instructed the guards not to approach her alone. At 11:55, the palace courtyard was already under observation. 2 guards stood near the main entrance while another watched the security monitors inside the control room. A 4th guard was positioned near the side entrance, just in case the woman attempted to enter from another direction. The palace grounds were unusually quiet. A cold wind moved through the trees surrounding the outer walls, causing the branches to scrape softly against the stone structures. Every sound seemed louder than usual. At 11:59, one of the guards looked toward the main gate. Nothing. The road beyond the gate was completely empty. He checked his watch. 1 minute remained. Then the clock began to move toward midnight. The first chime echoed through the palace. At the second chime, the guard inside the control room suddenly noticed something on one of the cameras. A dark figure was standing near the outer gate. He immediately called the others. The guards looked outside. There she was. The mysterious woman had appeared again. She was standing in exactly the same place as the previous night. The head guard approached the gate but stopped several meters away. "Madam," he called out firmly. "You need to leave this property." The woman did not respond. He waited. Nothing. He tried again. "Who are you?" The woman remained completely still. The guard slowly opened the smaller pedestrian gate. The metal hinges made a loud sound as they moved. He stepped outside. His colleagues watched him carefully from inside. He walked toward the woman, 1 step, then another. The woman did not move. As he came closer, he noticed details he had not seen the previous night. Her dress appeared extremely old-fashioned. The fabric was dark and worn, and the lower portion was slightly dirty from the ground. Her hands were pale, and she was holding something small in one hand. The guard stopped. "What are you holding?" The woman slowly looked down at her hand. Then she looked back at him. She still said nothing. The guard raised his flashlight. "Please show me your face." Slowly, the woman lifted one hand toward her veil. The guard instinctively stepped backward. For a moment, he thought she was going to reveal her face. Instead, she simply adjusted the veil and turned her head toward the palace. The guard followed her gaze. She was looking directly at the main building. "Do you know someone inside?" he asked. No answer. "Are you looking for someone?" The woman remained silent. Then she took one slow step backward. The guard moved forward. "Wait." She took another step backward. "Stop." Another step. The distance between them increased. The guard suddenly noticed something strange. Although the woman was walking backward across the ground, he could not hear her footsteps. Not even once. The guard looked down. There should have been marks in the loose soil. There were none. He quickly turned his flashlight toward the ground. Nothing. He looked back at her. She was standing several meters farther away. He could not understand how she had moved so quickly without making a sound. He called for the other guards. 2 of them immediately came through the gate. The woman remained motionless. The 3 guards formed a line and slowly approached her. "Please identify yourself," one of them said. Still no response. The head guard reached for his radio and contacted the security room. "Check the cameras around the outer wall." A voice came through the radio. "We're checking now." A few seconds passed. Then the response came. "There is no one on the road." The head guard frowned. "What do you mean?" "The cameras show the road is completely empty." He looked at the woman standing directly in front of him. Then he looked back toward the palace. "That can't be right. She's standing right here?" The security officer inside the control room switched between the cameras. The woman appeared clearly on one monitor. But when he checked the camera covering the road behind her, there was nothing. No person. No vehicle. No movement. The guard outside looked increasingly uncomfortable. He asked the woman one final time, "Why do you come here every night?" For the first time, she reacted. Her head slowly turned toward him. The guard could not see her eyes beneath the veil, but he could feel her attention fixed directly on him. She raised the hand holding the small object. The object looked like an old piece of paper. She held it out toward him. The guard hesitated. He slowly reached forward. The woman did not move. His fingers came within inches of the paper. Then the palace lights suddenly flickered. Everyone looked toward the building. For only a second, the courtyard became dark. When the lights returned, the woman was standing several meters away. The guard stared at her. He had never seen anyone move that quickly. He tightened his grip around his flashlight and followed her carefully. Stop. The woman continued walking backward. The guards followed. She moved toward the old stone pathway that led around the eastern side of the palace. The head guard radioed the security room. Lock the eastern entrance. The response came immediately. The eastern entrance is already locked. The guard stopped. He looked toward the woman. She had stopped too. She was standing beside the old stone wall, the same wall that had been closed to visitors for decades. She slowly turned toward it. Then she raised her hand and touched the stone. The guard watched closely. She remained there for several seconds, her hand pressed against the wall. Then she turned her head slightly toward the guards. For the first time, the head guard noticed that the woman appeared to be waiting for something. Not trying to escape, not trying to enter, waiting. And whatever she was waiting for seemed to be somewhere inside the palace. The following night, the palace authorities decided that watching the mysterious woman from a distance was no longer enough. For several nights, the guards had witnessed the same impossible pattern. At exactly midnight, the woman appeared somewhere near the palace grounds. She never spoke. She never attempted to force her way through the gates. She simply stood there, staring toward the royal residence as though she were waiting for someone. But this time, something was different. The palace had increased its security. Additional guards were positioned around the outer walls, the main entrance was locked, and every corridor leading toward the private royal quarters was being monitored. The security team had also reviewed the previous night's camera recordings, hoping to discover where the woman came from. They found nothing. The footage showed an empty courtyard before midnight. Then, within seconds, the woman appeared. There was no visible entrance, no opening gate, no approaching vehicle, no person walking toward the palace. She was simply there. The head of security watched the footage several times. Each time, the same thing happened. At 11:59:58, the area outside the palace was empty. At exactly midnight, the woman appeared. The head guard leaned closer to the monitor. Play it again. The technician rewound the recording. Again, nothing. Again, still nothing. The woman appeared without explanation. The palace officials were becoming increasingly concerned. If she could somehow appear inside the monitored grounds without being detected, then the security system was useless. That night, the guards were instructed to pay particular attention to the palace's eastern corridor. It was an older section of the building that had rarely been used in recent years. The corridor connected several historical rooms and eventually led toward a private staircase. At approximately 12:15 in the morning, one of the guards noticed movement on the security monitor. A figure was walking slowly through the corridor. The guard immediately stood up. He recognized the black dress. It was her. The mysterious woman was inside the palace. The guard called the head of security. She's inside. The response came immediately. Where? Eastern corridor? Are you certain? Yes. Several guards rushed toward the corridor. The palace doors were still locked. No alarm had been triggered. No windows had been opened. Yet the woman was clearly visible on the security camera. She walked slowly through the corridor. Her head remained lowered. Her black dress moved slightly as she walked. She appeared completely calm. The guards reached the corridor and found it empty. They checked every doorway. Nothing. They looked behind curtains. Nothing. They searched the nearby rooms. Nothing. One guard returned to the control room. The woman was still on the monitor. The guard stared at the screen. She is still there? The technician looked confused. We're right there. The technician turned toward the monitor. The woman was walking through the corridor. But when the guards looked down the actual corridor, they saw nothing. The technician checked another camera. The woman appeared there too. Then another. She appeared on that camera as well. It seemed as though the security system was recording her from different locations at the same time. The head of security ordered everyone to remain calm. Do not approach her alone. The guards continued watching. The woman slowly passed a series of enormous royal portraits hanging along the corridor. One portrait showed an old king. Another showed his wife. Then another showed a young prince. The woman stopped. She stood directly in front of one particular portrait. The camera zoomed in. The woman raised her hand. She touched the portrait. The guard watching the monitor noticed something unusual. The woman appeared to recognize the person in the painting. She remained there for several seconds. Then she slowly turned away. The lights in the corridor flickered. The security monitor went black. The technician immediately checked the system. The camera had lost power. Camera 3 is down. The head guard looked toward him. Restore it. We're trying. The screen remained black. Then another camera went offline. Then another. Within less than a minute, several cameras covering the eastern corridor stopped working. The guards inside the palace became nervous. They had no idea where the woman was now. The head of security ordered the corridor to be sealed. 2 guards were positioned at one end. 2 more were sent to the opposite side. Nobody was allowed to leave the area. A few minutes later, the lights returned to normal. The cameras came back online. The technician immediately checked the eastern corridor. There was no one there. The woman had disappeared again. But then one camera showed something unusual. A door at the far end of the corridor was slightly open. The guards knew that door. It belonged to a room that had been locked for many years. The head of security approached it carefully. He placed his hand on the handle. The door was cold. He turned the handle. It opened. Inside was a small, forgotten room covered in dust. Old furniture stood against the walls. A broken mirror hung above a wooden table. Several boxes were stacked in the corner. There was no sign of the woman. The guards searched the room. Nothing. Then one of them noticed something on the floor. A single piece of black fabric. It appeared to have come from an old dress. The head guard picked it up carefully. Before he could say anything, another guard noticed marks on the dusty floor. They looked like footprints. Bare footprints. They began near the center of the room and continued toward the wall. The guards followed them. The footprints stopped directly beside an old wooden panel. The panel appeared to be part of the wall. The head guard pressed against it. Nothing happened. He pressed harder. Still nothing. Then he noticed a small metal handle hidden beneath the dust. He wiped it clean. The handle was attached to a narrow section of the wall. He pulled it. The panel moved slightly. A dark space appeared behind it. The guards looked at each other. One of them raised his flashlight and pointed it inside. There was a narrow passage behind the wall. It was completely dark. The passage seemed to lead deeper into the oldest section of the palace. The head guard stepped closer. The air coming from inside was noticeably colder. He raised his radio. "Control room. We've found something." The technician responded. "What did you find?" The head guard looked into the darkness. "I think there's another corridor behind the wall." He waited for instructions. Then, from somewhere deep inside the hidden passage, they heard a faint sound. It sounded like footsteps. Slow, bare. Approaching from the darkness. The guards stood completely still as the footsteps echoed through the hidden passage. One step. Then another. The sound was faint, but unmistakable. Someone was walking toward them. The head guard raised his flashlight and pointed it into the darkness. The narrow passage disappeared several meters ahead, surrounded by old stone walls covered in dust and cobwebs. "Is someone there?" he called. There was no answer. Only another slow step. The guards exchanged nervous looks. One of them tightened his grip on the radio while another slowly moved closer to the opening. Then the footsteps stopped. The passage became completely silent. The head guard waited several seconds before stepping inside. The air was colder than the room behind him. His flashlight moved across the walls, revealing old stonework and faded markings that appeared to have been hidden for decades. The other guards followed. They moved carefully through the narrow passage. After several meters, they reached an old wooden door. Unlike the other doors in the palace, this one had no handle. Only a small metal lock was visible. The head guard examined it. It looked extremely old. Maybe this passage connects to the old royal wing? One of the guards whispered. The head guard nodded. He had heard stories about an abandoned section of the palace, but no one had been allowed to enter it for many years. Before they could investigate further, something caught the light. A small object was lying on the floor. The head guard bent down and picked it up. It was an old photograph. The image showed a young woman standing in front of the royal palace. The guards stared at it. The woman in the photograph was wearing a long black dress, the same type of dress they had seen on the mysterious woman. The head guard turned the photograph over. There was writing on the back. The ink had faded, but a date was still visible. It was more than a century old. One of the guards looked at the photograph again. Could this be her? No one answered. The head guard placed the photograph carefully into a protective envelope. Then he looked at the locked door. They needed to know what was behind it. They returned to the security room and informed the palace historian. When the historian saw the photograph, his expression immediately changed. He stared at it for several seconds. "Where did you find this?" The head guard explained everything. The historian remained silent. Then he asked them to follow him to the palace archives. The archives were located in one of the oldest parts of the building. Thousands of documents, letters, photographs, and records were stored there. The historian unlocked several cabinets. He began searching through old files. The guards waited. After several minutes, he pulled out a large leather-bound book. He placed it on the table. "This palace has many stories that were never included in the official records," he said. He opened the book carefully. Several pages contained handwritten notes about members of the royal household from more than 100 years earlier. Then he stopped. His finger moved across one particular name. He looked at the photograph. Then back at the page. "This is her." The room became silent. The guards leaned closer. The historian explained that the woman in the photograph had once lived in the palace. She had been connected to the royal family, although her exact position had never been clearly documented. According to the old records, she had disappeared suddenly. The official explanation stated that she had left the palace. But the historian pointed to another document, a handwritten report from a palace servant. The report mentioned that the woman had been seen inside the eastern wing shortly before her disappearance. The same wing where the guards had just found the hidden passage. The historian turned another page. There were references to strange noises in the palace at night. Doors opening by themselves. Footsteps in empty corridors. And a woman appearing near the eastern wing after midnight. The guards listened carefully. The historian continued searching. Then he found something even more disturbing. A drawing. It showed the layout of the old eastern wing. Several rooms were marked with symbols. One particular room had been crossed out in black ink. The historian looked at the guards. That room no longer appears on the modern palace plans. The head guard asked why. The historian did not answer immediately. He turned another page. There was a note beside the drawing. The handwriting was old and difficult to read. It described a private room that had once belonged to the young woman in the photograph. The room had reportedly been sealed after her disappearance. The historian explained that generations of palace officials had avoided discussing it. The guards asked whether the sealed room could be behind the hidden passage. The historian looked at the old palace map. Then he compared it with the location where the guards had found the secret entrance. His expression became serious. "Yes," he said quietly. The hidden passage appeared to lead directly toward the sealed room. The guards returned to the eastern wing with the historian. They stood in front of the old wooden door again. This time, the historian examined the lock. He recognized the design immediately. It hasn't been opened in a very long time. The head guard asked if anyone had a key. The historian shook his head. According to the old records, the key had disappeared shortly after the woman's disappearance. The guards began searching the nearby area. They examined old cabinets, wooden boxes, and shelves covered in dust. Eventually, one guard found a small metal container hidden beneath a loose floorboard. Inside was a single antique key. The historian stared at it. He compared its shape with the lock. It matched. The head guard inserted the key. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then the lock clicked. The door slowly moved inward. A wave of cold air passed through the passage. The flashlight beams entered the room. Dust covered almost every surface. An old bed stood against one wall. A wooden dressing table stood near the window. Several books were scattered across the floor. A large mirror had been covered with a dark cloth, and above the fireplace was another portrait. The guards stepped inside. The historian approached the portrait. He wiped away the dust. The face became visible. It was the same woman from the photograph, the woman who had been appearing outside the palace every midnight. The head guard stared at the portrait. Then he noticed something beside it. A small handwritten message had been carved into the wooden frame. The letters were old, but still readable. The historian leaned closer. The message appeared to have been written by the woman herself, and beneath the final line was a date that matched the night she disappeared. The room remained completely silent as the guards stood around the old portrait. For several moments, nobody spoke. The discovery had changed the entire situation. Until then, the mysterious woman had been nothing more than a strange figure appearing at midnight. Now there was physical evidence connecting her to the palace, to the abandoned eastern wing, and to a woman who had disappeared more than 100 years earlier. The palace historian moved closer to the portrait. He carefully examined the faded wooden frame and the writing carved into it. The message was short, but the handwriting was unmistakably old. He traced the letters with his finger without touching the damaged surface. "This was written before she disappeared," he said quietly. The head guard looked at him. "What does it say?" The historian hesitated. He read the message slowly. It was a warning about a secret that had been hidden inside the royal family for generations. The guards exchanged uneasy looks. The historian turned toward the room. He began examining everything carefully. The old bed was covered in dust, but several objects remained on the bedside table. There was a small silver hairbrush, an empty glass bottle, and a tiny wooden box. The box was locked. The head guard picked it up. The historian inspected the lock. There was no key. They searched the drawers of the dressing table. Most were empty. One contained old pieces of jewelry. Another held several folded letters. The historian opened the first letter. The paper was fragile and yellow with age. The writing described the woman's life inside the palace. She had apparently been close to a member of the royal family. The letters suggested that she trusted someone inside the palace completely. But that trust had eventually been broken. The historian continued reading. The woman's final weeks inside the palace appeared to have been filled with fear. She had started receiving anonymous messages. Someone was warning her to leave. At first, she believed the messages were a joke. Then strange things began happening. Her bedroom door would be locked from the outside. Personal belongings would disappear. Footsteps could be heard outside her room late at night. And on several occasions, she claimed to have seen someone standing at the end of the eastern corridor. The guards listened carefully. One of them asked whether the woman had ever identified the person. The historian shook his head. She never wrote the name. Instead, she referred to the person only as the one who knows. The historian opened another letter. This one contained a more disturbing statement. The woman believed someone was trying to silence her because she had discovered something about the royal family. The exact nature of the secret remained unclear, but she had apparently found evidence that could damage the reputation of an important member of the royal household. The head guard looked toward the portrait. Is that why she disappeared? The historian did not answer. He continued searching through the documents. Then he found a diary. It was hidden beneath several old books inside a wooden drawer. The cover was damaged, but the name written on it matched the woman in the portrait. The historian carefully opened it. The first pages described ordinary life inside the palace. There were notes about meals, social gatherings, royal ceremonies, and conversations with members of the household. But as the diary continued, the tone changed. The woman began writing about fear. She described hearing footsteps outside her room every night. She wrote about doors opening without explanation. She mentioned seeing a shadow near the eastern staircase. Then one entry stood out. She claimed that she had discovered a hidden passage behind one of the palace walls. The guards immediately looked toward the doorway. The same passage they had just entered. The historian continued reading. According to the diary, the woman had discovered the passage accidentally. She had been searching for a missing personal item when she noticed a loose section of wood behind a large cabinet. When she moved it, she found the hidden entrance. Inside the passage, she discovered an old room that appeared to have been used for private meetings. There were chairs, documents, and several sealed boxes. She believed the room had been used secretly by members of the royal household. The diary did not explain exactly what happened there. But the woman had apparently discovered something that frightened her. She wrote that she had found documents bearing royal seals. Some appeared to have been deliberately removed from the official archives. The historian paused. The guards waited. He turned another page. The next entries were shorter. The woman believed someone knew that she had found the documents. She began locking her bedroom door every night. She stopped walking through the eastern corridor alone. She even considered leaving the palace. But she remained because she believed that leaving without exposing the truth would allow the secret to remain hidden forever. The historian continued reading. One entry mentioned a confrontation. The woman wrote that someone had entered her room late at night. She had recognized the person's voice. But she did not reveal the name. Instead, she wrote that the person had warned her never to speak about what she had discovered. The next few pages were torn out. The guards noticed immediately. Someone had deliberately removed them. The historian examined the remaining pages. The final complete entry was dated the night before the woman's disappearance. She wrote that she had decided to meet someone inside the eastern wing at midnight. The meeting was supposed to reveal the truth. The historian looked at the guards. That is the last complete entry. The head guard asked what happened afterward. The historian turned the page. There were only a few lines. The handwriting was rushed and uneven. The woman wrote that she could hear someone approaching. Then the final sentence stopped halfway through. The rest of the page was blank. The guards stood silently. The historian closed the diary for a moment. But the head guard noticed something inside the back cover. A folded piece of paper had been hidden there. He carefully removed it. It contained a list of names. Some belonged to members of the royal household. Others belonged to servants and palace officials. Next to several names were dates. One name had been marked repeatedly. The historian recognized it. The person had been an important member of the royal family at the time. According to historical records, that person had been present in the palace on the night the woman disappeared. The head guard looked toward the old portrait. The woman's face seemed almost alive beneath the dim light. Then one of the guards noticed something else. There was a small compartment beneath the dressing table. It had not been visible before because it was hidden behind a decorative panel. The head guard opened it. Inside was a bundle of letters tied together with a faded ribbon. The historian carefully untied them. The first letter contained a message from someone inside the palace. It warned the woman that she was in danger. The second letter contained a different warning. The third was more personal. It appeared to be from someone she trusted deeply. The letter described a secret meeting scheduled for midnight. The location was the eastern wing, the same place where the guards now stood. The historian read the final line. The person who had written it promised to tell her everything. But there was something unusual about the letter. There was no signature. Instead, there was only a small symbol drawn at the bottom of the page. The historian recognized the symbol from the old palace map. It was the same symbol that marked the sealed room. The guards looked at each other. The connection between the mysterious woman and the hidden section of the palace was becoming impossible to ignore. Then the head guard noticed a second folded paper beneath the letters. He opened it carefully. It contained only one sentence. The historian read it aloud. "Somebody in this palace knows what happened to me." The room fell silent again. The head guard looked toward the doorway. The corridor outside was empty. But somewhere beyond the walls, the palace clock began moving toward midnight. The palace clock began to move toward midnight. The guards stood inside the forgotten room, surrounded by old documents, letters, and the diary that had remained hidden for more than a century. No one wanted to speak. The head guard looked at his watch. 11:54 p.m. Only 6 minutes remained. The historian carefully gathered the old documents and placed them on the table. He was still trying to understand everything they had discovered when one of the guards suddenly noticed something through the doorway. A faint shadow had appeared at the far end of the corridor. The guard raised his flashlight. The beam traveled across the stone walls. Nothing. He lowered it. The shadow was still there. He raised the flashlight again. This time, the figure was clearly visible. A woman stood at the end of the corridor. Long black dress. Dark veil. Bare feet. The same mysterious woman who had appeared outside the palace every midnight. The guard immediately stepped backward. "She's here." Everyone turned toward the corridor. The woman remained motionless. The historian stared at her. For the first time, he seemed less frightened than shocked. He whispered the woman's name. The figure slowly raised her head. The palace clock struck midnight. The first chime echoed through the eastern wing. The woman began walking toward them. Slowly. One step at a time. The guards remained still. Nobody attempted to stop her. Her footsteps made almost no sound against the stone floor. As she approached, the head guard noticed something in her hand. It was a small envelope. The woman stopped several feet away. She lifted the envelope. The head guard carefully stepped forward. Is this for us? The woman did not answer. She extended her hand. He reached for the envelope. The moment his fingers touched it, the woman turned her head toward the historian. The historian looked at her carefully. You were trying to show us something? He said. The woman remained silent. Then she slowly pointed toward the old diary. The historian looked down. The diary was lying open on the table. The pages began moving. There was no wind inside the room. Yet the pages turned one after another. The guards watched in disbelief. The pages stopped at the final entry. The historian moved closer. There was writing on the page that had not been visible before. A few words appeared beneath the final sentence. He read them quietly. I was not alone that night. The guards looked toward the woman. She pointed toward the hidden passage. The head guard understood. She wanted them to follow her. The woman turned around and began walking toward the darkness. The guards followed carefully. The historian carried the diary. They entered the narrow passage behind the wall. The woman continued ahead of them. Her figure moved silently through the darkness. At the end of the passage, she stopped beside an old stone door. The head guard recognized it immediately. It was the same door they had found earlier. But now it was open. Beyond it was another room. This room was smaller and almost completely empty. There was only a wooden chair, an old table, and a large chest. The woman stood beside the chest. She pointed toward it. The head guard approached. The chest was covered in dust. He tried to open it. It was locked. The historian examined the lock. Then he looked at the envelope. He opened it. Inside was a small metal key. The head guard took it. He inserted it into the lock. The key turned. The chest opened slowly. Inside were dozens of old papers. Some were official documents. Others were personal letters. There were also several photographs. The historian picked up the first photograph. It showed the royal palace more than a century ago. Several members of the royal household stood outside the main entrance. The woman was there too, but she was standing beside a man whose face had been scratched away from the photograph. The historian turned it over. A date was written on the back. He picked up another photograph. Again, the same man appeared. Again, his face had been deliberately damaged. The historian examined the remaining photographs. Every image containing the man had been altered. Someone had tried to erase his identity. The head guard looked at the mysterious woman. She was standing near the doorway, watching them. He asked, "Was he the person you were meeting that night?" The woman did not answer. Instead, she pointed toward one of the documents. The historian unfolded it. It was an old palace report. The document described an incident that had supposedly never happened. A private meeting had taken place in the eastern wing on the night of the woman's disappearance. Several people had been present, but the official palace records stated that the eastern wing had been empty that night. The historian's hands began to shake. The document contradicted the official history. Someone had changed the records. He opened another document. It contained the names of the people who had attended the meeting. The same names appeared on the list they had found earlier. The final name was the man whose face had been removed from the photographs. The historian recognized him immediately. He had been one of the most powerful members of the royal household. According to official history, he had left the palace years before the woman disappeared. But these documents suggested something completely different. He had been there that night. The historian continued reading. The documents suggested that the woman had discovered a secret agreement involving members of the royal family. She had threatened to reveal it. The mysterious man had attempted to stop her. But something else had happened during the confrontation. A witness had seen them arguing. That witness had written a statement. The statement was inside the chest. The historian opened it. The witness described hearing shouting from the eastern wing, then a loud crash, then silence. The witness had attempted to enter the room, but the door had been locked. When the door was finally opened, the woman was gone. The man was gone too. The room was empty. Only a broken piece of jewelry remained on the floor. The historian searched the chest. He found the description of the jewelry. Then he looked at the mysterious woman. She was wearing the same piece around her neck. The guard stared. The historian stepped closer. The woman slowly lifted the necklace. It was old. Very old. And identical to the piece described in the witness statement. The historian finally understood why the woman had returned. She had not been appearing randomly. Every night, she had been leading them toward the truth. The head guard looked at the clock. 12:07 a.m. The woman suddenly turned toward the corridor. She seemed to be listening to something. The guards heard it too. A faint sound came from somewhere behind the wall. 3 slow knocks. Knock. Knock. Everyone froze. The woman looked toward the wall. The historian raised his flashlight. There was no visible door. No opening. Nothing except old stone. Then the mysterious woman walked toward it. She placed her hand against the wall. The temperature inside the room suddenly dropped. The lights flickered. The guards stepped backward. The woman slowly turned toward them. For the first time, her hand moved toward the veil covering her face. She touched the edge of it. Then she began lifting it. The guards stood completely still. The historian stared at her. The veil moved upward inch by inch. And as her face began to appear beneath the dim palace light, the old clock in the distance suddenly stopped. The palace clock remained frozen. For several seconds, nobody moved. The mysterious woman stood silently in front of the guards, her veil slowly falling away from her face. Her appearance was not terrifying in the way they had expected. She looked sad. Her eyes carried the weight of someone who had been waiting for a very long time. The historian stared at her and suddenly understood. She had not returned to harm anyone. She had returned because her story had never been told. The woman slowly pointed toward the documents inside the old chest. Then she looked toward the portrait hanging in the forgotten room. The historian picked up the diary and turned to the final page. A new sentence had appeared. Now they will know the truth. The woman looked at the words. For the first time, a faint expression of peace appeared on her face. The palace lights flickered once. Then everything became completely silent. When the lights returned, the woman was gone. There was no sound of footsteps. No open door. No movement in the corridor. Only the old necklace she had been wearing remained on the floor. The guards searched the entire eastern wing, but they found nothing. The mysterious woman never appeared at midnight again. The royal family eventually opened the old records and revealed the hidden story that had been buried for generations. The forgotten woman was finally given a place in the palace archives, and her name was restored to the history of the royal family. But there was one strange detail that nobody could explain. Every night, exactly at midnight, the palace clock would stop for 1 minute. The clockmakers repaired it several times. They replaced the mechanism. They replaced the hands. They even replaced the entire clock. But the same thing continued. At midnight, it stopped. And during that single silent minute, palace guards sometimes reported seeing a woman standing peacefully near the old eastern window. Not inside the palace. Not outside the gates. Just standing there. Watching over the place where her secret had finally been discovered. Perhaps it was only a shadow. Perhaps it was the reflection of the moonlight. Or perhaps some stories are not meant to disappear, because when a truth has been hidden for too long, sometimes, even the dead refuse to let the world forget.